Back when my daughter was still quite little, we used to go to a nearby park to play. I was a stay-at-home mom, and she was my first and is my only kid. My husband is also in the military, so we tended to move around a lot. Because of this, I don't get to interact with other adults very often, and with my daughter just starting a new school, it was a great way for us to get some interactions from other parents and kids. So, since she had half days on Fridays, I would pick her up from school, run some errands if I had any, and then head to the park for a few hours. Charlie was always an outgoing child. When we went to places like the park, she was always quick to meet friends. She would run up to the others and introduce herself and start playing with them instantly. If she noticed someone playing alone, she would immediately go to them and share whatever toy she brought with her so that they weren't alone. I had to talk to her about making sure we don't share too much information because she can also get carried away. For her age, though, she was also pretty smart and aware of her surroundings, but I blame her father for that. Anyways, this is all what caused the situation we ran across one day at the park with another kid there. We went to this park as we normally did, and after looking it over, Charlie told me she was heading to the swings and she ran off ahead of me. I caught up and pushed her for a bit and was playing with her and talking about her day at school. While standing there, I was looking around the park as you do to see all who was around, what's going on nearby, things like that. I noticed a middle-aged woman walking to the park with a young girl, probably close to my daughter's age. I remember them because the mom looked like she had a firm grip on the girl's hand, where the little girl looked a bit nervous, like she may have been shy. They stopped by the entrance or the actual playground area when the mom knelt down and told the girl something. She looked very serious about it too, but again, my thought was probably just laying out some ground rules. Stay in my sight, no wandering off with strangers, etc. Then the mom sat down at a picnic table and the girl slowly walked off to the actual playground. I turned my focus back to Charlie as she started talking, saying she was going to try the monkey bars and hopped off the swing. I noticed the little girl had gone over the bridge onto the other side of the monkey bars and just stood there watching us. I smiled at her as she gave a shy smile back and then looked towards her mom. I noticed at this point the mom was sitting facing the playground but was nose deep in a newspaper, circling and writing things on it and making phone calls. I helped Charlie across the bars, and when she got to the other side, she did as I anticipated, excusing herself to not kick this girl and then asking her if she was going to go across. She shook her head no, and then Charlie began her berating of questions. Do you like monkey bars? Have you tried them before? Are you afraid of them? The girl shyly answered she didn't know how to do it, to which Charlie volunteered me to help since I was so good at it. I then agreed, looking back over at Mom and seeing her still preoccupied, offered to take her across, and she agreed. I got her set up on the first one, and then helped her across on the other side. Once there, Charlie clapped and told her she did a great job, which made the girl smile. So after taking them both across a few times, Charlie introduced herself and asked the girl what her name was. After a few seconds of looking around, she told us it was Carrie. So from there, the two of them played together for a while, so I decided to sit at a different bench for a while. The picnic table she was at was to my right, so I would gaze over and see the mom either still on the phone or writing, or she would glance up and look around for Carrie and then continue with what she was doing. After a few, I saw the two of them sitting in the middle of the merry-go-round and talking. Charlie had quite a confused or puzzled look on her face, so I was assuming they were telling stories or something. A little while after, they both came up to me and Charlie asked for her snack and if she could share some with Carrie. I agreed, and as I started pulling it out, Charlie said she had to run to the restroom, so I reminded her where it was and watched as she walked over to the facility. Once she went in, I finished pulling out the crackers and water when Carrie said I was a really nice mom. I smiled and thanked her and told her she was a really nice kid and that I bet your mom is pretty nice too, huh? As I tilted my head to the side. She looked over to her mom and her smile seemed to change, like it was fake, and she said, "Yeah, my real mom is." This, of course, caught me off guard at first, but then I thought maybe it was her stepmom or another guardian that was watching her. So I just chuckled a bit and began pouring some of the crackers out for her. As I did this, she then said, "My name's not really Carrie." Not really knowing how to respond to that, I just said, like, "Oh yeah?" And almost as if she was whispering to me, she said, "My real name is Sabrina." So I said something like, "Well, nice to meet you, Sabrina," and started asking her why she had a fake name when Charlie came running back over to us as well. That's when she told me it was the name she gave her and pointed to the woman on the bench. Charlie started eating and was just listening to us when she cut in to say, Carrie just moved here and asked if she could come over to watch the movie and have a new friend. Normally, I was all for her making new friends and getting contact info from parents, but the look in Sabrina's eyes was different from a kid begging please. It was more of a plea for help. I asked her if she was okay, and she said she didn't want to go home with her. This immediately put me in defense mode. I had Charlie sit next to me and eat, while I looked the little girl straight in the face and said, "Do you know that woman that brought you here?" I remember she looked so scared and looked over at her, then back at me, and she said, "I don't know." I tried explaining to her that she wasn't in any trouble, and she wouldn't be. Anything I could to keep her calm, but to get more info out of her when I heard someone shout for Carrie. She looked up and started walking over to that woman, so I tried to act calm and uncaring. I turned to look at Charlie and smiled, talking to her as I tried glancing back up at Sabrina. I noticed the woman was now shaking her arm really hard, and she looked like she was about to cry. I wasn't the only person to notice this, though. I saw a couple of adults looking in that direction at them too, so I decided to take a chance to calm the situation some. I told Charlie to stay put, and I walked over to Sabrina and the woman. I introduced myself and said my daughter was very outgoing and that she immediately invited her over for snacks and apologized profusely that I didn't ask her first, worried about possible allergies. I even made sure to refer to her as Carrie. The woman seemed to let go of her and immediately began rubbing her arm and softened her tone. She said it was no problem and she was just worried about where she was since she wasn't in the last place she saw her. I paused for a second, not knowing what to do next, when Sabrina asked if she could play a bit longer. The woman then agreed, and as she said a few more things to her, I started walking back to Charlie. That's when she said to me, "Sabrina's scared, Mommy." I couldn't risk it. Having my own daughter there and thinking what I would do if anything happened to her, I called the cops. The girls went back and continued to play, so I called them while they weren't around. They stayed on the phone until they said someone had showed up at the park, and I called the girls back over. I told them both to stay by me, no matter who came up to the bench. To my surprise, though, as I stood up to turn around and see the cop, I noticed the woman at the table was gone. Even her newspaper or whatever she had was gone. I gave my report to the officer, and we actually had a few other adults that came over and asked if it was about the girl too, because they had more to add as well. It turned out that the little girl's real name was Sabrina. She was abducted by this woman and was told to use the name Carrie in hopes they wouldn't be found. Sabrina talked to the cop and they ended up taking her with them, even though she cried, asking to stay with us. I told her she was safe and that they would help find her real mom. I learned later on that the woman was someone they didn't know, her parents. I don't know if she was a family member or just a friend, but they took her when they weren't aware and actually left the state. They weren't even from the state we were in. She was reunited with her real parents, but of course, I didn't really hear much else about it. Sometimes I want to look her up just to see how she was doing, or her parents. I'm just incredibly thankful that day that my daughter was so outgoing and willing to reach out to others, and that she trusted me and Charlie enough to tell us. It scares me to think about what could have happened if I didn't catch on or if she didn't speak up. Kids can be smarter than you think, so keep an open mind and don't pass off some of the off-the-wall things they say as just some weird kid talk. I grew up in a very busy family. Both of my parents worked a lot and were hardly home, meaning time together was few and far in between. We spent a lot of time with babysitters and relatives, and when we did on the rare occasion have a family vacation, it wasn't all that special. It was typically a hotel with a pool that me and my siblings would play in, and maybe one of my parents while the other one was working in the room. I bring this up because my now wife, girlfriend at the time, had a completely different family. They always had time together, including weekly dinners, get-togethers, and vacations. They started inviting me on vacation with them, and it was always a blast. Resorts, staying at their condo in South Carolina, all kinds of memories. One thing that my wife loved to do was go camping with her father. She said they usually went to the same campground, but always went as far back as they could and deeper into the woods, so that way there were less people around to bother them. They also liked doing this so they could go fishing without anyone else disturbing the waters. I had never camped in my life, and the closest thing to fishing I had done was those little toy fishing games you see at the state fair, so when they asked me to join them, I didn't hesitate. My wife and I went and got supplies for myself, some new stuff for her, and a fancy blue tent for ourselves. We made our way to the campground right outside a little city in Wisconsin and met her dad in the parking lot. We then followed him towards the back of the grounds, parked, and then started grabbing our gear to walk through the trees and bushes. When we got through it though, I knew it had to be the perfect spot to camp. I could just barely make out our vehicles, but you could hardly even hear the other cars driving by. Because of the walk to get there, you also had plenty of time to hear someone approaching. So we set up our tents, got our fire pit ready, and then started getting out our fishing gear in order. I, embarrassingly, needed help with mine, but thankfully my wife, Jen, helped while Mike teased, all in fun though. Once we finished, we walked a little further down by the water and started fishing. It went pretty well. I had some troubles, but nothing that stopped me or held me back from doing it more. We started our fire, made a small dinner, and just relaxed. It was a great first night camping, in my opinion. It wasn't till we went to bed that the problems started occurring. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep. I couldn't get comfortable, I got too hot, every little sound I heard made me sit up and look around. I know it made no sense and I was being unreasonable, but I suppose with it being my first time, I wasn't used to not sleeping on a mattress behind a locked door. All the while, I was impressed as to how deep in sleep Jen and my snoring father-in-law was. Thankfully, I finally fell asleep, but was awoken by another sound sometime later. I rolled over to hold my wife when I noticed she wasn't in the tent. Thinking maybe she was just going to relieve herself, I just waited for her to return. I remember checking my watch and the time was around 2 in the morning. I laid there and managed to fall back asleep and again woke up to noises. However, my wife still hadn't returned. I looked at my watch and it was now a little past 4. As I started to put my watch back down and unzip my sleeping bag, the tent started to open and in came my wife. Tired and not all coherent, I just asked her if she was okay. Her only response was, "Tired," and she slipped back into her sleeping bag and was right back out. I didn't give it much attention after that and just worked on falling back asleep. The next morning, I was groggy, but I was ready to get the day started and enjoy this time we had. We would be out here for 2 more nights, so I wanted to do all I could while we were there. We made a quick breakfast, went to a nearby hiking trail for several hours, then went swimming. From there, we took showers in the rooms they had set up nearby and headed back to our spot to fish some more. I definitely did better this time around, and with all we did during the day, I was hopeful that I would crash that night. I did. I was out pretty quickly, but woke up when I had to use the restroom. As I rolled over, I noticed Jen wasn't in the tent again. I checked my watch and it was around 2 again. I thought it was just a coincidence, but I sat up waiting for her to get back so I could go out there. When she didn't return for several minutes, and with it getting harder for me to hold it, I finally just got up and went out. I grabbed a flashlight, walked straight from the entrance to our tent through the trees a little ways over, and took care of business. As I was walking back, I was trying to look to see if I could find Jen. I saw our tent, our fire to the right, and then Mike's tent on the other side, facing the opposite way of ours. But no Jen. I started walking around the pit to see if she was over by her dad's tent when I noticed a light coming from the ground facing away from the tent. I started approaching the light, which already had me panicking as it was towards the dense trees, so it made it look like there were a lot of people standing there. After reasoning with myself that they were just trees, that's when I noticed they weren't all trees. Jen was standing there, tall, not moving, looking slightly up towards a tree. I picked up her flashlight and asked if she was okay. No response. I walked in front of her and noticed her eyes were wide open, staring into this tree. I looked up into the tree to see if I could see anything, but there was nothing there. I then looked back at her, put my hand on her shoulder, and said her name. She didn't respond. It was weird, and I didn't know what to do. So I just told her I was heading back to the tent and walked away, looking back at her every few steps. She never moved, never said anything. Her stare didn't break. I went back to the tent and fell asleep. I didn't know how long it had been at first, but I woke up to her coming back in. I checked the time and again, it was 4 a.m. I again asked her if she was okay since she had been out there for a few hours. Again, the only response I got was, "Tired," and she fell back asleep. I just sat there staring at her for a few seconds before I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I asked her how she slept. She said she actually felt exhausted, like she didn't hardly sleep, and then joked how mine and her dad's snoring kept her up. So I mentioned her being up for about 2 hours staring at a tree. She thought I was joking at first, but then I explained more how she did this the night before, and again this last night, and how I found her. She didn't recall any of this. She said she never left to go to the bathroom. She wasn't looking at a tree or anything. But I was adamant she did. She just shrugged it off, saying maybe she slept walked, I agreed, since she didn't remember this, but she doesn't sleepwalk. I've never seen her do this in our apartment. Not wanting to dwell on it, we enjoyed our last day there, doing stuff around the campsite and visiting a few places that Mike wanted to go to. Night came and I readied myself for bed. This time, though, I would try to stay up to catch Jen leaving the tent. We went to bed. I laid in bed for a bit, and after she fell asleep, I pulled out my book I had brought to read. It helped for a bit, but I couldn't hold my eyes open much longer and started drifting off. However, I awoke to hear the tent being zipped up. I looked at the clock and it was 1:58 a.m. I got out and watched as she walked through those trees again, no shoes on, holding just the flashlight. When she got to that same tree, she dropped the flashlight and just stared up at it. So I again approached her, saw the blank look on her face, staring up at this tree. I walked all around this tree to see if I could see anything at all. There was nothing there. I shined the flashlight in her face, and she didn't even flinch or blink. Finally, I grabbed her by both shoulders and gently shook her, calling her name. And like some creepy-ass movie, she slowly looked down at me and said, "It's waiting," and slowly looked back up at this tree. I let go of her shoulders, looked back up at this tree one more time, and just saw the branches move. I could not see a damn thing, but that was enough to make me run back to the tent. I know, call me whatever you want for leaving my wife there, but I felt something obviously preferred her presence over mine. I definitely couldn't sleep after that, so I stayed awake, waiting to see her return. Like clockwork, she came back at 4:17 a.m. and went right back to sleep. It apparently showed the next morning that I didn't sleep well. As we were packing up, I walked around that tree one more time to see if there was anything there, and nothing. The only thing slightly off seemed to be the gap between some of the branches, kind of like when something big goes through a bush and leaves a gap. Something had definitely been in that tree, but I saw nothing. I just told them that I had trouble sleeping and didn't bring it up till after we got home. We didn't have smartphones at the time, so I couldn't really take pictures or a video of it, but she believed me for some reason. She still didn't remember any of this, but I sure as hell did. What's even weirder is that we have gone camping since at other places with no incident. I was reminded of this because Mike is retiring and was planning a trip out to this campsite. With a kid of our own now, we're thinking about going with him, but if she does this again, or my kid does, I'm sleeping in my car. There is an old empty house behind my house. It can clearly be seen from my room window. I study late at night every day. Once it was a warm night, I opened my window and started to study. At 1 a.m., I went to bed. The window was fully open as it was warm weather. When I went to sleep, I had a dream. It was about some people wearing red hoodies, which were praying to Satan, and it was seeming like black magic. They were doing black magic with burning fire in the middle. My heart was beating very forcefully. In the dream, I was seeing all this. Then I prayed to God. I said, "Oh God, please help me," again and again. Then my eyes opened. I woke up from the dream, but I saw that there was a long man, like a siren man, was seeing me from the window. He was so long that he was blocking the moonlight. Then I felt fear and started to pray to God again. I'm 16 and I experience many paranormal activities. This happened when I was just a little 13-year-old girl. I was planning to go to a friend's house for her birthday party, and then 4 of us were going to be staying the night for a sleepover. I was getting to the point that I cared about my appearance and liked wearing makeup, so I packed up my little backpack with my cutest outfits and makeup, excited to have a makeover with some of my best friends. I got to the party, and there were already about a dozen people there. My best friend Lacey was ready and waiting for me to arrive, and the birthday girl, Heather, greeted me and took the present from me. The theme was American Idol, if that tells you roughly the time frame this took place. There were other mutual friends there as well, as some I didn't really know, including my crush. We had cake and Heather opened presents, then we played some games and she was kind enough to team me up with my crush as well. One of the gifts she got was a karaoke machine, so once all the games were done, we set that up and all took turns with our god-awful preteen singing and trying to find songs with curse words in it, since we would be allowed to say it. As the party started dying down and people left, we would then be left with just the 4 of us. Me, Heather, Lacey, and Tamara. We helped clean up a bit, then Heather's parents helped us get set up in her room. She had a bed big enough for 2, and they put an air mattress in there for the other 2. Her mom made us popcorn and laid out soda, basically saying we could have the run of the house besides her bedroom, but after 10, we had to stay quiet as her dad would have to work early the next morning. She also had an older brother, but he had taken their van for the night, so it was just going to be us. We watched a movie in the living room, a scary movie of course, and then agreed to take it back to her bedroom so we could talk more and listen to music. We got set up in there and started talking about whatever young girls talked about. Boys, school, home life, rumors we heard, things we wanted to try, anything like that. Tamara brought some teen magazines for us to read, and they had some different makeup and hairstyles that we all wanted to try out on each other. We started doing each other's hair and makeup and gossiping about some of the teachers and other people we didn't like, and just ultimately having a lot of fun when we heard a loud banging coming from outside. Heather lived in a neighborhood where the houses were all very similar and very close together. Their backyard was pretty much shared with her neighbor behind them, so when we heard the loud noise, she could pretty much pinpoint where it came from. We also had the window open because it was cooler, so the sound was amplified as well. She mentioned her neighbors argued a lot, so they were probably fighting at the time. We continued on with our night when we again heard another loud banging sound. That's when Lacey turned the subject to them, asking if she's ever been able to hear what the arguments were about, and if it ever got physical, or if they've had to call the cops before. Heather assured us that it was never that bad, but they did just get loud, so sometimes she listened to them. She couldn't always make out what they were saying, but sometimes they took it outside where she could. Lacey wanted to listen at this point and stopped mid-eyeshadow application to go to the window. We just kind of teased her for being nosy and tried to finish our makeup when Lacey said, "Your neighbor is kind of creepy." Heather tried saying something about them not being all that bad, but then Lacey cut her off saying that he was trying to get in through the window. That stopped all of us, and we went over to the window to see. Sure enough, there was a guy trying to open a window from the outside. He was pulling on the sides, and when nothing was happening, we saw him pull something out of his pocket. We still don't know if it was a knife or key or what, but we watched him slice the screen and then beat on the glass. I remember looking over at Heather to gauge her reaction, but she looked just as curious as us, but also looking a bit nervous. We continued to watch as this guy broke the window and started reaching around and climbing inside. Then we saw a woman inside run to the window and started screaming at the guy. Once he got all the way in, she started shoving him back and he grabbed her by the face or throat, and they moved away from the window. We couldn't see them at this point, but could still hear her yelling some. Looking at Heather again, and the fact that she looked scared, I asked her if we should tell someone, as that did not look like a normal fight, and she agreed. She ran to grab her home phone and would continue to watch to see if they would come back to the window. After a while, Heather came back and asked nervously if she should call 911, as she's never had to do that before. Neither had any of us, so we didn't know if we should or if we should wake up her parents. We didn't want to bother anyone or get in trouble for calling 911, but as we discussed this, Lacey said he came back. So we all went back to the window and watched as the guy stopped at the window, looked down at something, then walked over to the door next to the window and walked out of it. He seemed to stand there after he closed the door for several seconds and then looked up to the sky and wiped his face. As he turned away from the door, he looked around, and to our horror, he looked right at us. That felt like forever, as we all just sat there and stared back at each other. Now, it was still dark, and there was a light above the door, but his facial features we couldn't really make out. Unfortunately, I don't know if we could say the same for him. The awkward stare was finally broken when he looked around and quickly ran away from the door. However, instead of running towards the driveway to leave, he went towards Heather's house. I think we all noticed at the same time and immediately moved away from the window, but Heather quickly ran out of the room. We then followed her to the living room where she was checking the front door to see if it was locked. As we stood there, we then heard the doorknob rattling. I think it was Tamara that let out a small yelp of sorts, and I was just frozen in fear. Lacey looked out the window and confirmed it was the guy, and I just started crying. I thought we just witnessed something we shouldn't, and now we were next. I ran back to Heather's room, planning to hide in the closet or under the bed, when I heard Heather yell and run to her parents' room, banging on the door. I was just standing in the bedroom at the time, so I heard them open the door and ask what was wrong, as Heather tried explaining as she pulled them to the living room. I followed behind them. Lacey is now frozen, standing back towards the kitchen entryway, and Tamara was crying too. Heather's dad had a booming voice and said something like, "You have 5 seconds to get off my property before I blow you to pieces." As he was saying this, her mom made us all go back down the hallway where their bedrooms were, and we could hear him opening the door. I heard him yelling as he ran outside while her mom made us stay back. At this point, I had grabbed the phone from her room and gave it to her mom, and she called the cops. They showed up and we had to explain what we had seen, but apparently we weren't the only ones to call. Someone else had called the cops too, so while they were talking to all of us, there were cops at our neighboring house and the house next door where the scene took place. It was a little hard to sleep that night after that. It turns out the guy was her old neighbor, or at least her neighbor's boyfriend, as he didn't actually live there anymore. He tried and successfully broke in, and she caught him doing it. He had apparently strangled and stabbed her, but she survived, probably because of everyone else that called the cops on him. It was really strange because it wasn't a bad neighborhood or anything, so it was really strange for something like that to happen. Tamara wasn't allowed over there at night anymore, but mine and Lacey's parents were still cool about it. Hell, I don't blame them. Not like it was their fault either. But we definitely made jokes about it growing up, about how she had one hell of a party. Thankfully, that guy went to jail for a long time, so I hope he's forgotten our faces and that we never meet again. I got a job at Walmart in 2019, working as a cashier. I was laid off and decided to get what I could at the time, just to get some extra money, so my husband wasn't the only one working. It was alright for the most part. In 2020, I started helping more at the doors with counting how many people were coming in and going, and to make sure they were wearing masks. It was alright for the most part. You got an occasional person that would lose their mind when you offered sanitizer or a mask, but it was tolerable. However, I did see people do some crazy things while just walking around on my lunch or breaks. At one point, when people started freaking out about toilet paper issues and thinking we were going to be locked down for months, things started to be too much. The store was a mess. Shelves were already empty, and people were losing their minds. There was one night in particular, I remember walking to the back to go on break when I was walking past the toilet paper and paper towel aisles. There was one lady that was crying as she pushed a cart with a single gallon of milk in it, and a kid in the front of it licking the cart handle, touching the shelves, and sticking his hands in his mouth. I overheard a couple debating if they should try using paper towels instead, or go someplace else first. I saw people fighting over sanitizer, and the kid next to them screaming at their parents to stop. These were all upsetting to see, but it didn't stop there. One night, I was talking to my friend that was stocking shelves after I was off work. They were stocking toilet paper, of all things. There was a guy that came in from the other end of the aisle and slowly made his way towards us as he looked at the shelves. He eventually got right to my friend, like within arm's length, and I motioned with my head to my friend that he was right behind him, so he stood up and asked if there was something he could help with. The guy went off. He started getting angry, claiming we were holding back inventory on purpose to make people like him suffer. My friend and I were equally confused. He was literally stocking the shelves at the time. He tried calming him down, but the guy must have seen the box cutter sitting on the pallet, and he snapped. He stepped backwards and pulled out like a switchblade, saying, "Let's have a real knife fight." My friend grabbed the pocket knife, so this guy didn't try to grab it, and we walked backwards as we tried to calm the guy down. He didn't really pay much attention to me, so I was able to pull out my phone and call 911. Someone else that worked there must have heard what was going on, and they rushed over to help us out as well. Somehow, we finally got the guy to put the knife away, but police still came and arrested him. I know 2020 has been one hell of a year, but some people just snapped. I quit shortly after this because I couldn't risk any more weird occurrences like that. All I can say though is be safe out there, watch your surroundings, and just be kind to others. Well, that, my friends, was another collection of true scary stories. I swear there's always something weird going on at a Walmart somewhere, right? I feel like it's like an unspoken law at this point. I don't know. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing if you haven't already. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts. Or if there's a topic that you'd like to see covered, let me know as well. Otherwise, I hope you all are having a fantastic week. And until next time, take care.